Wait a minute. What is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of World War II? Probably Hitler, Auschwitz, and the Holocaust. These names are stained in blood across history, textbooks, and movies. But let me ask you a question. Did you know that during the exact same era, an equally brutal program operated in Asia? A program that some historians consider even more systematic, and its existence was hidden by powerful states for 50 years. No graves, no registered names, nothing left of the victims, because the killers left zero witnesses to erase all evidence. Today I will tell you about Unit 731, and here is the darkest part. The monsters who did this were never punished. Instead, some were protected directly by the United States. Ready? Because the story will truly shatter your mind.
Part 1. A public health project.
Japan invades northeastern China, establishing a puppet state named Manchukuo. Here, a secret project begins under microbiologist Shiro Ishii. Officially, the unit was disguised as a public health initiative. Its stated goal was researching soldiers' resistance against disease and starvation. Sounds reasonable and humane, right? A state protecting its military, but that fake mask slipped incredibly fast. Authorised in 1936, Unit 731 was actually a covert biological weapons program. The 1925 Geneva Protocol strictly banned biological and chemical weapons. Japan signed it but never ratified it, exploiting this massive legal loophole. For them, international treaties were just scrap paper.
Part 2. Maruta, no longer human.
This is where the story plunges into absolute horror. Unit 731 decided to test their biological weapons on live humans. No sane person would willingly volunteer to be injected with deadly viruses. So Unit 731 used helpless captives. Prisoners of war and innocent civilians were dragged from the streets into laboratories. Chinese, Russian, and Korean victims populated the cells. And here lies the critical detail where humanity completely ended. The victims were never addressed by their names. Researchers stripped them of humanity, calling them Maruta, meaning logs of wood. Think about it. When you view a human as a log, your conscience goes numb. They are no longer human, just disposable test subjects. In the Pingfang facility alone, over 3,000 men, women, and children were destroyed as logs.
Part 3. The experiments, atrocities as science.
What happened inside is not an exaggeration. These are documented facts. Doctors performed surgeries without anesthesia, extracting organs from live patients. They exposed victims to extreme environments and injected lethal infections. One physiologist, Yoshimura Hisato, had a specific obsession with frostbite. He submerged prisoners' limbs in ice water until they froze solid. An eyewitness stated that striking the frozen limb with a stick sounded like hitting dry wood. Subjects were deprived of food and water to measure survival limits. Heavy objects were dropped onto tied prisoners to test crushing injuries, and perhaps the most sickening part involved forced pregnancies. To study how diseases pass to a fetus, infected males were ordered to rape female prisoners. Once pregnant, women were monitored to check the virus's impact on the unborn baby. To examine organ changes in real time, pregnant women were vivisected while fully conscious. Reread that sentence. A living pregnant human dissected alive under the name of science.
Part 4. Civilians as biological weapons.
Unit 731's experiments didn't just stay inside the labs. These weapons were tested in the real world. Researchers bombed nearby cities and villages with plague-infected fleas. They poisoned water wells with cholera and typhoid. This targeted innocent civilians who had absolutely nothing to do with the war. Official estimates suggest between 200,000 and 300,000 people died from Japan's biological warfare. This staggering number includes both inside victims and civilian field tests. The massive gap in numbers proves just how systematically everything was covered up. Now we come to the most ruthless part of this story. Unit 731 officially left 0 survivors. Every single prisoner died from experiments, starvation, or execution. Think about it. In Nazi camps, there were survivors when the war ended. Their testimonies were recorded during the Nuremberg trials. But the Japanese completely obliterated all potential witnesses. They guaranteed that Allied forces would never encounter a living victim from Unit 731. This wasn't a standard war crime, it was a planned, systematic erasure. Before retreating, the Imperial Japanese Army burned almost every single test record.
Part 5. America's Secret Deal: The Ultimate Betrayal.
Now we arrive at perhaps the most shocking chapter of this story. The war ended. Japan was defeated. Justice would be served, right? Wrong. Following the surrender, the US granted immunity from war crimes to Unit 731 staff. Think about this for a second. Monsters who froze people alive, forced rapes, and murdered thousands with bioweapons. They all walked away free. Not a single day in prison. The initial US investigator, Murray Sanders, was initially misled by his translator. The translator was actually a covert Unit 731 member protecting his peers. But why did the United States ultimately protect these war criminals? To prevent this priceless biological warfare data from falling into communist hands? With the Cold War looming, keeping this data away from the Soviets was everything. Thousands of lives were traded for scientific data. Justice was completely sacrificed for geopolitics.
Part 6. 50 Years of Silence.
How did this nightmare stay hidden for so long? The Japanese government refused to acknowledge the atrocities for decades. They didn't officially recognize the unit until 1988, and even then, no apology followed. History textbooks completely ignored the subject. When historian Saburo Ienaga tried to include these truths in his textbook, the Ministry of Education tried to censor and delete his passages. It took a massive Supreme Court ruling in 1997 to rule against the government's censorship. A nation literally used state power to block its own youth from learning the truth. In 2010, human bones excavated in the Pingfang area were analysed. Decades later, the soil itself is still whispering the truth. But perhaps the most unsettling reality is how the medical world used this data. The horrific data extracted from dying humans was quietly absorbed into international research. Blood data, biological insights, pathogen behaviours, all built upon the screams of the Maruta. So, why do so few people know this story? The answer is simple, yet painful. Because the victims were Asian, because no witnesses were left alive, and because the winners buried the truth for their own strategic gain. History books taught us about Hitler and Auschwitz, as they absolutely should, but history also shows us that humanity often chooses data over justice. When we remember Unit 731 today, we do the only thing left for those logs. We refuse to forget. They have no graves, no marked names, but they have a story, and telling it returns a fraction of the justice they were denied. In the next video, we will uncover another hidden corner of history. Until then, think about this. What atrocities are being buried today under the name of strategic interest? See you next time.